Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Yeti's Den. My guest today, Dr. Nick Archer, political science professor at Middlesex College.
Good to be here.
All right. So, you've been teaching at Middlesex College now since the fall of 2010?
Yep, 15 years. 15 years.
Nice. When you first got hired, did you think you would be here for at least 15 years or?
No, I thought I'd be who knows where else. I thought I'd be somewhere else, but I was a very different person at that time with very different goals than what I have now. So I'm fortunate and glad that I've been here for 15 years. It's the kind of job that allows me to have, shape young minds, or try to at least, but also at the same time, it does pay me well and allows me to go on trips around the world. So, I feel blessed to have the job I have.
Nice. So, when you first got down to Jersey, do you think students are so? You typically have like 18, 19, 20-year-old students. Do you have any like older students, like students in their 30s or 40s, who decide that they're going to like they may not have gone to college right away, like maybe they went right into the workforce after high school, or they were in a trade and then they decide like in their 30s or 40s they want to get at least an associate's degree? Like, do you have any of those kinds of students?
Once in a blue moon, I have someone like that, whether it's a non-traditional student, a senior student, something like that. But generally, I'm teaching 18 to 21-year-olds.
Nice. Are students any different today than they were like 15 years ago?
Yeah, they're a lot more challenging to teach now because I think they have more distractions in front of them with smartphones, laptops, the internet being constantly hooked into their veins for, 24 hours on end, basically. So the attention spans are shorter. The ethics are tougher, with the advent of AI and ChatGPT. To a lot of these kids, ChatGPT, from an academic standpoint, we consider it plagiarism and cheating. But to these kids, it's a fact of life. And, it sometimes feels like we're running up against impossible wall where you're trying to explain the ethics of AI and the problems with AI, but they just see an easy answer and they go for it. And then you have to deal with the result of that and the denials and all the things that go along with it. So I would say students' attention spans are much more challenging to deal with now than they were 15 years ago, or maybe even 20 years ago when I really started teaching in earnest during graduate school.
Right. It's like when I started teaching history, I had my kids on Chromebooks, but then I learned from my observer that there were at least 5 kids not focused on the work. They were like shopping on eBay or playing a computer game or watching Netflix. So I had to say no more laptops, and they fought back. But I said, where one of my other teachers put it in a good way that I feel like can really convince kids the importance of no technology in certain classes. And he said that like law school students who take notes, like handwritten notes, have been shown to do better on the LSATs and on the bar compared to students who are just like studying images on a computer. Like I remember back in my day, there was some kids who are like, "Oh, I've never gone to that class. The professor just puts all the slides on the online, so I just read it online." And it's like, you could do that, but you don't get the full experience. And studies have shown you're more likely to succeed in the course if you're actually going to the class and like handwriting notes compared to just observing slides. And that was discovered years like I discovered that like when I was a long time ago. But I think that's been known for a very long time now. But are you having any luck trying to convince students that like, yes, AI and ChatGPT can be fun tools, but they're not. It's not as ideal for learning compared to taking notes and reading books?
Well, I do tell them at the beginning of every course, we go over all the ethical problems AI, and we talk about how AI dulls cognitive function and makes people, really, to put it in stark terms, dumber when they rely on AI to do all of their analysis, decision making, all that. And you'd like to think that it gets through to kids, but really it gets through to maybe a third of them. And the other 2/3 still think it's just, I want to do things the easiest way possible. And ChatGPT and AI and all these other programs let me do that. They're the people who probably shouldn't be in college. They should be somewhere else learning a trade, working in sales or service industries, because there's dignity in working in any particular industry if you're working hard at it and trying to succeed. And not everyone has to go to college. So I think about 2/3 of the people I teach probably would be doing much better somewhere else. And instead, because they're somewhere they really aren't supposed to be, they try to take every shortcut and cheat in every way they possibly can because they just want to get through the experience. Whereas the kids who take it seriously and actually take the notes and, pay attention and engage with the class, they're done a disservice because they have to deal with the other 2/3 of the class that doesn't want to be there. So I think, we talk about education and education policy. We really need to push the idea that there are other ways to get educated beyond college. And I say that as a college professor and someone who values college, that college is not for everyone, and that we should encourage multiple forms of education to maximize everyone's talents and not try to fit people into boxes.
Right. And I agree with that as well. Like I've seen a lot of students who are choosing to go to trade school right out of high school instead of college. Like I feel like a lot more students nowadays compared to when I graduated high school back in 2008, and that's totally okay. And it's also trade schools we need trades, and you don't get saddled with all that student loan debt. So, which brings me to how we've been the problem with student loan debt and really the problem with education. So when you first got down there, Chris Christie was your governor, and I remember you said you were very anti-Christie back in 2013. And Christie, I mean, it's half of politics is how you present yourself, and like Christie was just really good at presenting himself, and he had that large in charge persona. So I feel like a lot of people just kind of liked how he talked and stuff. I mean, he wasn't as like closed-minded and bigoted like Trump, but like people liked how he talked, so they went out and voted for him. And sometimes too, when you listen to him, I mean, he seems sane. I mean, and he really seems sane now compared to the other GOP wackos that are out there now. But I mean, I was reading a book for one of my teaching practicum class, and people need to remember he still was if you're an educator, he's not your guy, because one of the many anti-education things that he did was he cut funding for public education and used that funding for tax credits to try to bring like jobs, companies like into the state of New Jersey. Like I see the idea of like having low taxes to bring companies to your state, but you shouldn't be cutting public education in order to do so. So why? I'm sure you agree with me on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Not only did he cut education, but he also, and part of the reason he despises public education is like other Republicans, he despises organized labor, and education is one of the few places unions still maintain a strong presence. And so, anytime you can attack the unionized sector of the economy, you're going to see a Republican governor generally do that. And education makes it doubly more important. And there's generally a hostile reception to, quality public education in the Republican Party. And I think Christie is no different than most Republicans in that regard. He certainly has the personality that distracts people from his actual issue positions, or had that personality. But, he was deeply conservative, actually, in the fiscally, in the way he ran the state. The war on public sector unions that he had was pretty brutal. And again, caused significant economic damage to the livelihoods of not just K through 12 educators, but college educators and, other people in the administrative apparatuses of school. We've had to shoulder a bigger burden of our healthcare plan than we had to in the past. We had to, our pensions were under attack. They've been saved, thankfully, but he was pretty brutal, right? He was pretty brutal, but he came off as sort of a Jersey guy, so people ignored the consequences of the actual policies he put in place.
Right, and I think a big re-election booster was Hurricane Sandy. I mean, he was after the hurricane, he was out there, talking to people, as a governor should, and saying, powerfully that they were going to rebuild the state of New Jersey. And so then it's like people saw him out there, and they saw him as wholesome and caring. So they went out and voted for him for re-election. And it should be noted, though, according to my and the stuff I've read, because I've studied elections and turnout, I believe, according to what I've read, only 39.6% of actual New Jersey voters even came out in the 2013 election.
Mm-hmm.
So once again, it's yeah, he won re-election, but it's if everyone voted, perhaps things could have been different. And then what really brought Christie down, I feel like, and he never fully recovered, at least for his approval rating, is the Bridgegate scandal. And he's tried to punt the blame to his two aides, but his two aides who got convicted of it said that he's actually at fault. He just was able to basically successfully punt the blame. Do you think he knew about the bridge closing down?
Yeah, I'm absolutely sure he played a direct hand in it, right? And he also funneled a lot of Sandy reconstruction money to cronies rather than to the places that needed it to rebuild. So, the corruption he said that he was going to fight against when he first got elected, he just became just as corrupt as the people he said that he was against, if not more so. Right.
And then what really got to, I actually shared this on Facebook back in June 2017. And this is when his approval rating had fallen to 20%. There was a government shutdown in the state of New Jersey in June 2017, and the beaches were closed. But he took his family to the beach, and he enjoyed the beach with his family, when it was closed to the public. That's what's wrong with that? That's totally wrong. It's why did he do that?
Right. Well, it just shows ultimately who he is. And again, he is not some populist Jersey guy. He's a rich former prosecutor, rich lawyer, well-connected. And, he always, no matter what image he gives off, he always has represented the rich elite and always will.
Right. But then Phil Murphy got elected in 2017. He won with 56% of the vote. So he decisively won in 2017. And my neighbor was a big union guy. My neighbor works for the National Association of Government Employees. And he's actually met Phil Murphy and has a picture with them. So, and then in 2021, Murphy actually became the first Democrat governor to be reelected in New Jersey in 40 years or something like that. Did you see that statistic?
I did. He certainly Republicans since the 90s have had a hand here. Although we have to remember, John Corzine did get the governorship too. So, but in terms of being reelected, yeah, he was he's the first in 40 years or so to get reelected as a Democrat in 2021. Although, as we know, it was a much narrower result than people were predicting. He beat Citarelli only by 3 points. In an extremely narrow race that people thought he was going to win by 10 points. So, that sort of portends the question, where is New Jersey heading politically, given the closeness of that election and what will happen and might happen in the election we have coming up next week.
Yeah. And do you approve of the job that Phil Murphy has done? And if so, why? Like, and this is really important for the rest of the nation to look at. Like, they can look at what Chris Christie did for 8 years and then what Phil Murphy did for 8 years. And what 8 years was New Jersey better off, and why? And why was New Jersey better off under Phil Murphy than Chris Christie, do you think?
Because he actually invested in social programs and actually had programs and policies that were legitimately progressive. One of the things he had was a tax on the wealthy that they got through, a tax on the super rich that raised a ton of revenue to the point where for at least a little while, the state was running a budget surplus because of the sheer amount of money that was bringing in. He tried to help educators with their healthcare struggles by creating a new public healthcare program for educators that saved us a lot of money on health insurance premiums and things like that. He helped create a law that says that basically if you make under $100,000 or under, you can't be charged medical debt. Essentially, or medical debt, if you incur it, it won't count against your credit rating or something like that. He wiped out a lot of medical debt. I think he gave an increased amount of aid to schools in the state too, as well. So, he, even though he's a very, very rich man himself, he acted far more progressively than Christie ever did. And I think his record was one that, for the most part, is amicable and admirable as a progressive governor. In COVID, he also was one of the people who really got the response right from the beginning in terms of lockdowns, mask requirements, things like that. And he was able to, through his cordial dealings with Trump at the time, able to get a lot more COVID aid into New Jersey than perhaps other more combative governors were at other places in the United States. So I think his 8 years stand as a testament to what progressive government can do. Now, that hasn't stopped his opinion rating from falling out as he leaves office, and I think it's probably undeserved. I think it's, he's being blamed for a lack of affordability in this state that he doesn't have a lot of fundamental control over. But I think his 8 years were very progressive, in terms of the medical debt, in terms of increasing access to healthcare. We got not universal community college, but significant increases in aid to students going to community college. So my community college, when I started there, most students were paying their own way to get through a $10,000 bachelor's degree. Thanks to Murphy, when he was elected, and the aid that he and the Democratic legislature passed here, a lot of students are now getting financial aid and getting what amounts to a near tuition-free, fee-free, early higher education experience. So again, I think he was an admirable progressive. He clearly, I think he could have ran NJ Transit a lot better, but that's something that can be said of probably every governor, regardless of party in this state. But I think he shows that progressive policies work and that you can use government to better the lives of ordinary people.
Absolutely. So, which brings me to this upcoming race. It's from what I've read so far, there's been a much higher turnout for Democrats in both voting early and vote by mail than the Republicans. Like, the polls have been, Cheryl's starting to pull away, but the polls have been narrow. And it was said that who's it? Jack? What's his last name?
Chitterelli.
Yeah, it was said that he had a good debate performance, at least the first debate. But it looks like indications from what I'm seeing is it looks like Cheryl will have a narrow victory. And more importantly, it's important for the state legislature to stay in the Democrats' hands, because that's been a problem for Democrats like for the past 15 years, or ever since Obama got elected for the first time, is that we've neglected state legislative elections, and that's why the GOP has been able to take over and gerrymander in a lot of states. And we gotta make sure that doesn't have, that the Democrats can stay in control of the New Jersey state legislature, and it will also make potentially Governor Sherrill's job easier.
Well, again, first of all, in terms of the polls, I wouldn't, for the most part, I wouldn't trust them. The same polling organizations that 4 years ago had Murphy running away from Chitterelli and ended up being 3 points. I think this race is far closer than the polls indicate. As I see it, it's probably about like a 48%, 46% race, with probably Sherrill in a narrow lead. I mean, certainly the early voting and the mail-in voting tallies that have been done so far seem to indicate that. But, anything can happen on election night. The one thing you can't predict early turnout, but you certainly can't predict election day turnout. And, Chitterelli supporters are very much in the same camp as most MAGA supporters, and they are very, welded to and committed to their ideology. So we don't know what their numbers will be when they turn out. They're also low information conservative voters that tend to not always turn out reliably, but when they do turn out, they can help swing elections like they did with the 2024 election and the 2016 election. So I wouldn't necessarily trust polls, to tell us exactly where this race is. I think it's a 2-point race one way or the other, and we will be up pretty late on election night before we know actually who won. I don't think it's going to be an early victory for either candidate on election night. So we'll see where that goes. In terms of the legislature, it's absolutely important that the legislature maintain itself, because God forbid we get Governor Chitterelli. We need good voices in the legislature to stand up to whatever his agenda is. The last thing we need is what we have had under the Christie administration, where we had more conservative Democrats in the state legislature cozying up to Christie to get the education funds cut, to get a lot of things privatized, like the electrical grid and things like that. So, I think don't trust the polls. This is probably a closer election than you would think, but whether it's, helping a Governor Sherrill enact more progressive policies or serving as a defense mechanism against a Governor Chitterelli, voting in the assembly elections is vital, right? Don't just leave the top of your ballot filled out with just the governor's race filled out. That those down ballot races are probably, important, if not more important in some ways than the governorship, because again, these people serve longer terms too. They're the ones who ultimately pass the legislation that will get into law by whoever the governor is. So absolutely, we have to keep the assembly, and I think we will. I don't think the assembly is going into Republican hands. There's been no scholarly analysis from people who know Jersey politics well to suggest that they think that the legislature is about to turn Republican anytime soon. But again, you don't know what turnout's going to be. You don't know, what the enthusiasm gap is between Sherrill voters versus Chitterelli voters. It'll be an interesting election night. And I think it'll be a long night. I do not think we will know a winner, say at like 8 p.m. I think it'll be much closer to 11 p.m. or midnight before the race is called. And it might even be later than that, depending on how high the turnout really ends up being ultimately on election day.
Yeah. And I mean, New Jersey in 2020. So I got in 2016, Hillary beat Trump there by more than 14 points. And that actually, in 2012, Obama beat Romney there by almost 18 points. And in 2020, Biden beat Trump there by about almost 16 points. But in 2024, Harris only beat Trump there by just under 6 points. And a driving factor could be the southern counties in Jersey have flipped.
Right. The southern counties in Jersey, for those who don't know geography well, are more towards the shore, more towards the Delaware area, and more towards suburban Philadelphia. And they generally tend to be much more center right than center left down there, based on income levels and rural locations and things like that. They tend to be far more moderate to conservative than, say, central New Jersey, where I am, where Democrats have a big stronghold in the counties surrounding central New Jersey and northern New Jersey as well.
So, but like it's Obama, Clinton, and Biden like won those counties. So it looks like back then they're at least like they could be center right, but they, Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Biden were able to do enough to keep them in the Dem camp. But Trump finally was able to flip them in 2024. Do you think it's a lot of it's about money? Like they prefer privatization over socialization?
No, I think more of it is, some of it is probably pissed off at higher tax rates, but I think a lot of it is more cultural. They tend to be much more culturally conservative. They're more pro-gun than the rest of the state. Higher religious affiliation numbers. I think they represent more of a conservative culture. And I think probably the conservative culture that Trump was pitching, along with his, amazingly false promise to fix the economy, probably both played a role in why he did so well in those counties. Whereas in the past, maybe, Democrats had an easier time with it.
Yeah. So before we move on to the New York City mayoral race, I do have to say, Andy Kim, who was on the ballot with Harris last year, did better than Harris, and he did slightly better down in southern Jersey. And do you think before Cory Booker was elected back to the Senate from New Jersey back in 2013, before Andy Kim was elected, there was a lot of optimism. Like not only were they Democrats, but they weren't going to fall for the Washington corporate machine. And I mean, Booker to an extent. I mean, I think Booker's done a lot to reach out to people living in poverty and being smart on crime. I mean, Booker's he did vote against allowing cheaper generic drugs to be imported from Canada because Big Pharma doesn't want that. But how do you what's your approval of what's your feeling on both Booker and Kim? Like, do you approve or disapprove, and why?
Well, I think Booker is a mixed bag. Certainly, he's made, speeches and discussions about the poor and sort of attacked poverty when he was the mayor of Newark, right? But again, yeah, as you said before, he did vote against the cheaper importation of drugs from Canada. He voted to deregulate the crypto industry, which is, going to be a big financial disaster in a few years. Mark my words that the crypto bubble is going to happen. And he was one of the senators who voted to deregulate crypto. So, I think he's mostly progressive. I think he mostly votes on a progressive line most of the time, but he has certain positions that are clearly dictated to him by his biggest donors. Again, it's not a surprise that the pharmaceutical industry has a huge foothold in New Jersey. Johnson & Johnson is right next door to me in New Brunswick here. So, the lobbies that have a lot of power are still things that Booker listens to. I don't know if I have much of an opinion of Kim as a senator yet, since he's only been a senator for so long. I think I admire him for having the integrity to take on the county machines, the party machines, the Democratic Party machines that try to ram through their preferred candidates through rigged ballot lines and things like that. I think his fight to make the ballot design more fair to challengers, to non-establishment Democrats here, is admirable. I think his response as a congressperson, as a House of Representative member in the wake of January 6th to help people pick up the debris and everything that was, littered from that terrorist assault was, admirable as well. But as in terms of a senator, I can't say I followed his voting record all that well. Again, that's probably bad on my part, but he hasn't done anything that I would say strikes me as fundamentally reactionary or against Democratic Party principles. And I think, if we give him time, we need to give him more time to see the kind of senator he'll grow into being, because Cory Booker is definitely not the guy he came in as anyone. When they first come into an institution, they're one thing. And then after they're there for a while and learn how it works and what the limits are in terms of what you can change and what you can't, they become a different person then. So I think the jury's still out on Kim in my book. And I know for sure I'll start following him a lot more as we get it, after these elections and start getting back to, anticipation of the midterms and things like that.
So there's a lot of other elections going on, and it's, New Jersey's very notable because it has this off-year election, and like the whole nation has their eyes on it, as does Virginia. And in Virginia, it looks like my aunt and uncle live down there. It looks like Democrat Abigail Spanberger, and then the lieutenant governor for the Democrat who's running for lieutenant governor, looks like they're pulling away. And once again, Virginia is like the Dems took back the state legislature in 2019. The Republicans took back the House of Delegates in 2021, but then the Dems took the House of Delegates back in 2023. So we're hoping that the Dems can hold on to the legislature there and even expand it. The Attorney General is race down there as a toss-up. It's somewhat leaning to the Republican because some text messages got leaked about Jay Jones, the who's running as the Democrat, which is unfortunate, but still, I mean, it'd be good if Jay Jones won, but still, I wouldn't be surprised if the Republican Attorney General gets reelected. But it'll be very solid for Abigail Spanberger to be elected the governor of Virginia. That way, they can get more progressive legislation through down in Virginia, and it also will be a big mess. It'll send a message to Trump saying, like, because Northern Virginia is, I mean, that's the government shutdown is definitely affecting Northern Virginia right now. So it would be a big rebuke to Trump. But I want to turn to New York City, and Mamdani really is like there's, when it comes to Democrat versus Republican, there's also, in more recent times, there's been, Bernie Sanders style Democrats versus traditional Democrats. And it looks like Mamdani's about to pull it off. And he's got some ideas, or he's got some proposals that haven't been implemented in New York City before. But it's also like I'm a strong believer in cities showing like good policies and cities showing like the good stuff, that good like environments that they can create there. But in many cities, in many blue cities, it's very expensive. Like, I mean, in New York City, it's like it's like you got to almost be like a millionaire just to to stay afloat. So what do you think? Do you think Mamdani is the game changer everyone is saying that he is? And if so, how can he change New York City for the better?
Well, I think, he's, it's every city and every state is a little different, and you shouldn't always, tailor every campaign in a one-size-fits-all model. In some cases, pulling to the center might make sense, and in some cases, pulling to the left might make more sense. But clearly, Mamdani in New York is showing the efficacy of a economic class-based power politics, and how that can really unite otherwise disparate groups of people into one united bloc to vote for progressive economic policies. Now, I think some of the stuff he's tried to propose is, I think, free childcare. Isn't that one of them? Free childcare for everyone in the city.
He wants government-run grocery stores.
Right, government-run grocery stores. I think he mentioned something about improving the bus service or how that's owned. I think he's the kind of voice we need in the biggest city in the world. But I think, we shouldn't be naive to think that if he's elected, and he will probably be elected, I don't see Cuomo beating him, or certainly not the Republican who was a distant third. He's going to run up against entrenched interests. He's a big advocate for things like rent control, where the real estate industry is going to try to hammer him there, right? The fiscal hawks and the Wall Street types are going to try to hammer him on things like free healthcare. The restaurant industry and the grocers in New York City are going to hammer him on trying to get government-run grocery stores or food cooperatives started, if that's really what he's mostly talking about, I think. So I think he's showing the power of economic class-based campaign and what that can do to energize disparate groups of people to unite together. But I think he's going to have a lot harder time governing than maybe people would assume, just because New York is generally a Democratic city. You also have to remember Trump is illegal. Well, I guess it depends on what the judges say, is, invading American cities with National Guard troops and maybe other parts of the armed forces as well. I wouldn't be surprised if after Mondami is elected, New York is the next on that list, because Trump stands as, Mondami is the antithesis of Trump and everything that Trump stands for. And Trump probably will see him as an annoyance or a threat. And I wouldn't be surprised if he'll very soon after he's inaugurated that he'll be dealing with Trump trying to invade New York City against the wishes of both him and the people he represents there. I really think that's a very good possibility that happens.
Right. And a couple things I will say about New York City is, Mayor Eric Adams basically has been sucking up to Trump, and he was very unpopular, and he dropped out of the race because he knew he couldn't win. But I'm just reading now, though, that he just took executive action, or he's working, and they're saying that medical debt is now being wiped out for New York City residents, and it's like 125 million for tens of thousands of people, and then that's step one that he just announced, and then step two is going to come later, where even more amount of people, and I think up to something up to 500 million of medical debt is going to be wiped out. And in terms of animal rights in New York City, horse carriages, the horses have been treated very poorly for years. That's coming to an end in 2026. The horses are going to be free, and there's going to be non-animal ways to get tours of New York City. So I know you and I have mentioned animal rights in the past. That's another victory right there. So even an independent, like a Democrat turned independent like Adams is still pushing through common sense, debt relief, and animal rights.
Right. And again, the debt relief part goes back to playing class politics. And again, we have a Democratic Party that too often has gotten wrapped up in identity politics. And again, we understand that LGBTQ rights matter a great deal, and that Black and Latino and Indigenous rights matter a great deal. But those are also issues that, if they're not attached to a class-based context where you have things like wiping out medical debt, providing community grocery stores or whatever, you run the risk of people of groups mutually alienating each other and not being able to run a coherent campaign. So I think, I didn't know that Adams had done that, but, wiping out medical debt, that's clearly a good class-based policy that many people, regardless of any other characteristic about them, can, rally around. So, I don't really like Adams much, but kudos to him on that one. And in terms of animal rights, I think it's far beyond time that, the cruel treatment of horses there for just, a photo op tourist thing is, I think that that's a practice that it's good that that's being eliminated. And I'm glad to hear that that's being eliminated. I wasn't aware of that, but, anytime we can help, animal rights and give animals who are voiceless a human voice to speak out against their mistreatment, we should do so.
Yeah, another city In Miami, the Miami Aquarium, after 70 years, just closed because there's been a lot of accusations in recent years of a lot of mistreatment of the aquatic creatures there. So the aquatic creatures are being freed, and that just closed down. And Miami used to be a Democratic city. I mean, it's turned into. I mean, Trump became the first Republican presidential candidate to win down there, to win Miami-Dade County since Bush Sr. in 88. I have a friend who grew up down there, and he and I had a podcast episode where we talked about how and why Miami has changed so much. But there's a Miami mayoral election, and there is a candidate who's been backed by Trump and DeSantis, but there are other candidates down there. And if there's some candidates that are running more as more liberals who are campaigning on reducing the cost of living down there. And we mentioned, yes, I mean, Miami's become very gentrified. Like, it's like Miami's a city where you got to be making millions, like, just to get by. And like, if you're making millions, it's paradise. But if you're not, then you're going to really be struggling.
Right.
And then in Colorado, there's an initiative to put a tax on millionaires. I believe it's only 4%, and then it's specifically going to fund universal free lunch, breakfast. I believe breakfast and lunch, at least lunch, but breakfast and lunch for school kids. And the states that kept universal breakfast and lunch in 2022, when it got cut off after the pandemic aid expired, their kids are doing better. And I can tell you, in Massachusetts in 2022, we narrowly passed 52% to 48%. We 52% in favor of putting a 4% tax on anyone making over $1 million. The number of millionaires has not decreased. People haven't fled the state, and we've generated at least $5.7 billion of revenue. But if you look at the SNAP benefits are about to expire. A lot of SNAP benefits are in Trump country, and also the Obamacare subsidies. A lot of those are in Trump country. So
right.
We've been trying for years now to explain to Trump country, you get so much more from the federal government than that you give in. Okay, I mean, AKA like socialism, but like they don't get it, and they still and then they still have this. Is it? Are we ever going to convince these people, or should we? Or maybe if they did lose their food aid and their health care, they'd finally wake up.
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, one of the problems that the great journalist and public intellectual Walter Lippmann once said is the problem with people is we don't inherently think rationally. Actually, because the world is such a complex place, we chunk the world down into stereotypes. Generally not true, but stereotypes nonetheless that help us understand the world easier, right? And if the stereotypes you prioritize are racism, homophobia, Islamophobia, fear of immigrants and things like that, then that's going to dictate your behavior far more than economic arguments, right? So again, if you hold on, and one of the things we know is when you challenge people's stereotypes, very often, rather than accepting the new information, they dig deeper into their stereotype and go into an even deeper false reality, right? So, I think, if you look at polls of people in those red states and those rural areas, and you ask them issue by issue, do they support more money for healthcare and things like that? They actually say yes, right? But that doesn't guide their vote. What guides their vote is stereotypes about all these scary others they think are out there trying to get them, ruin their country, poison their country, all the stuff Trump feeds them that they sort of regurgitate because they're so enveloped in their stereotypes. So I think the only way to get past those stereotypes is, again, to try to make a class-based argument that doesn't sound elitist, that doesn't sound like some guy from New York City saying, oh, you don't understand that the government's giving you these food stamps, ha, ha, ha. But something that addresses them in that everyday language that they use down there, that's class-based, that can show them, just how much they benefit from more progressive policies. And I think we also need better civic education, and I don't know where we get it from, to make people challenge their stereotypes, because the only way to challenge a stereotype that's ingrained as much as it is to keep chipping away little by little until people are willing to see something else. And we need to find a frame that works to reach people and keep running. And I think one of the embarrassments is 68% of American elections, state to national level, are uncontested, meaning the incumbent wins by default. And a lot of those places are in the South, in the rural areas, in Trump country, right? But the Trumpers win and win again down there because no one's facing them. If Democrats just started running, even if they lost at first, but put a message out that challenged people's stereotypes and tried to get them thinking more in a class-centric way, even if you lose at first, the more you try and the more you repeat your message, the more it gets into the public consciousness down there. So I really would like to see more people take the brave step of trying to run in these allegedly hostile areas on a progressive economic agenda. And I think if you did that and you really committed yourself to it, you could actually see some change, at least in some of these areas. West Virginia, maybe not. They might be a lost cause. Florida might be a lost cause at this point, but maybe not. Right? We don't know. And until people are brave enough to start running those campaigns, and really digging into the fight to rebuild this country in a more progressive image from the bottom up, we won't know, what the answers to that are. But I think, people need to step up. People need to step up.
And last debate we'll talk about before we end tonight's episode is, I've always been very against gerrymandering, and I've always celebrated when states, like the people, have passed ballot initiatives to end gerrymandering in their state. For example, the state of Arizona actually outlawed gerrymandering all the way back in 2000, and California, I believe, did so in 2000 as well. But then in places like Ohio and Missouri, the voters voted to end gerrymandering, but like the elected officials ignored them. And like Texas is trying to gerrymander their state to the point where it would knock out a lot of Democratic
not
states.
to interrupt you there, but basically if the Texas map goes through, only Houston, Dallas, and Fort Worth would be represented by Democrats, even though the state is majority minority at this point in terms of demographics. So yeah, it's ridiculous.
All right, and then North Carolina's trying to gerrymander their maps. Indiana's trying to knock out their only knock out their. I believe Indiana has like 2 Dem congressional seats, but what they're trying to do now is to knock it down to just 1. Missouri's trying to do this. So yes, in California with what Newsom's doing to knock out Republicans. He's being forced to do this. So if I was a California voter, it's a reluctant yes. Yes, I'm against gerrymandering, but if the Republicans aren't going to play fair, then we can't play fair either.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not in normal times and we're not in civil times. And if Republicans are going to try to rig the election so that they never lose, Democrats have to take whatever tools they have available to them and take the fight to the corruption that the Republicans are putting out there, even if it's unsavory, even if people I admire like Arnold Schwarzenegger are against it. I think we do need to really use whatever tools we have to fight back the undemocratic takeover of the entire legislature and the entire government by the GOP, and what amounts to a very authoritarian fashion when you really, analyze it deeply.
Right. And the Supreme Court in 2019 ruled that they couldn't strike down gerrymandering, but they said if Congress passed an anti-gerrymandering law and the president signed it into law, then that would be constitutional. But the thing is, if the Republicans know that if they control the House and the Senate, we're not going to get um, a bill, like a nationwide bill that abolishes partisan gerrymandering. It Supreme Court, even this conservative Supreme Court, though, has left rulings in place that struck down racial gerrymandering, like in the South, like that. Like I know Louisiana was able to at first only had one Democratic seat, now they have two, and I believe Alabama also was able to get two, and then before the 2020 election, North Carolina and Georgia were able to, well, at least North Carolina. I'm not sure about Georgia, but it's like if we don't get rid of partisan gerrymandering, we're going to continue to fall down the path of a very divided nation. And I mean, do you think we're gonna? We're really there's a lot of division, and there's always been division in this country, but there's an excessive amount of division going on right now. Like I feel like it's at the level of like just before the Civil War in the 1850s, and there's like if you think like back in things were intense back in 2012 or 2016, like they're way more intense now. Like how are we going to break through all this divisiveness and this hostility? And is the nation ever going to be able to reset itself after everything it's been through the past decade?
I think that's an open question. No one can truly predict. But what I can say is Trump won't be around forever. There'll be a point where he's gone, either through him not abdicating after his term is up, passing away in office. Not that I'm saying I wish that to happen or anything. It's a fact, the possibility, just like Biden passing away was a possibility that people didn't talk about too much. But there's going to be a point past Trump. And I think, Trump is going to leave this country with such devastation. Basically, we're going to be if we're not already at third world status in many cases. And there's going to be the need to have the reconstruction we failed to have after the Civil War, a real reconstruction of our entire culture, our entire economy, our entire outlook on what it means to be American, what being American entitles you to, and focusing on the things that we have in common, those class-based things we have in common. We need a radical reconstruction, but I am optimistic in spite of myself that after the damage is done and Trump's gone and we're left with a heap of ashes, that Americans will find the ground that they need to come together and build another republic, a second republic, even if you want to call it that, based on far more humane, class-based economic principles and principles of fair play and more equal justice than we have now. But it's going to take a movement, and that movement is going to have to start planting its seeds now for when Trump is gone, so that it can take over and rebuild this country the way I think most Americans truly want to see it, which is a place where economically you're taken care of and individually you're free to pursue your happiness without much interference from anyone doing so.
Definitely. And until that time, well, we need to keep speaking out, and if you see something that's wrong, speak out against it, and explain why you think that your proposal, whether it's free childcare or socialized public transportation or rent control, like if you continue to find as many arguments as you can and continue to bolster your arguments for why we should at least try some of these things. And what tells me that we could potentially have it is, I mentioned the Massachusetts millionaires tax, which is not burdensome for millionaires, and it's generated a lot of revenue. But starting next month, New Mexico is going to have first of its kind free universal childcare. And I mean, if it can work, like in the past, good policies have started at the state level, and then once they see that it's working, it spreads from state to state, and eventually becomes, oftentimes, if if not every state adopts it, like if most states adopt it, eventually the federal government adopts it to be nationwide policy. So I really think, keep our eyes on the states like New Mexico that are passing free childcare. Like keep our eyes on the states that are passing, higher taxes for millionaires so that they can fund, strong public education and free school meals. And I think these ideas aren't going away.
I agree. I think change starts from the bottom up. Don't look at the federal government to be your savior. Even right after Trump goes away, you have to look at and start organizing and start articulating the progressive vision on the local and state level first. So when you get the opportunity to seize the federal government, and I mean in a peaceful way, obviously, but when you get to take over the federal government, then you have behind you a lot of proof that your vision works. So absolutely, change happens from the bottom up. Paying attention to what's going on the level of cities and the level of states is now more important now more than ever, especially at least for the next 3.5 years or so.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Nick Archer, political science professor at
Middlesex College.
Sorry. I was sorry for the freeze there. Middlesex College. It was a pleasure talking tonight, and we're going to have many more discussions. And to anyone watching, start your own. If you have a lot of viewpoints and you like to talk and you like to have these kinds of conversations, start your own podcast. The one great thing about today's world is that we live in a world where it's very easy to set something like this up.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Till next time, everyone, take care.